8 years ago, she looked at him across a courtroom table and said the words that shattered him. "I want a divorce, and I want you to disappear from my life." Tonight, under the golden chandeliers of their old high school reunion, she would learn that the man she discarded as worthless had quietly become one of the wealthiest men in the country, and she had no idea he was standing 20 feet away. If you believe in second chances, in humanity, in stories that remind us life has a way of balancing the scales, hit that like button right now, drop a comment below, share this with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Humanity Tales so you never miss a story like this one. Daniel Cole was 26 years old when his wife, Vanessa, walked out of their cramped one-bedroom apartment with 2 suitcases and a look of disgust on her face that he would never forget. He had just lost his job at the small engineering firm downtown, the 3rd layoff in 2 years, and their savings account held exactly $143. Vanessa had married him believing he was going somewhere, the golden boy from their graduating class, the one voted most likely to succeed. But success had not arrived on schedule, and she was not a woman who waited. "You had every chance to be somebody," she told him that night, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "and you wasted it. I refuse to spend my life with a man who can't even pay the electric bill." She left with her sister that evening, and 6 months later the divorce papers were finalized. Daniel signed them in a coffee shop because he could not afford a lawyer's office, his hands trembling not from anger but from a grief so total it felt like drowning. He remembered walking home in the rain afterward, no umbrella, no coat, just letting the water soak through him because it seemed fitting, because everything inside him already felt washed away. For the first year after the divorce, Daniel slept on his cousin's couch in a building with a broken elevator and a landlord who never fixed the heating. He took whatever work he could find, stocking shelves at a hardware store, delivering food on a bicycle he'd bought second-hand for $30, sitting in the dark some nights eating cold rice straight from the container, because turning on the stove felt like too much effort for a man who had nothing left to cook for. He thought about Vanessa constantly in those early months, replaying her words like a wound he couldn't stop touching. He thought about their wedding day, how she had cried happy tears in a white dress under string lights, how he had promised her the world and then watched himself fail to deliver even the basics. The shame sat in his chest like a stone, but somewhere in the wreckage of that first brutal year, something shifted in Daniel. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a single moment of inspiration. It was smaller than that. It was the night he sat on the cold floor of his cousin's apartment, sketching out an idea on the back of a delivery receipt, because he couldn't sleep, and his mind kept circling back to a problem he'd noticed while biking food deliveries across the city. Restaurants were losing enormous amounts of money because of how inefficiently they tracked inventory and predicted demand. He had studied systems engineering in college before dropping out to marry Vanessa and take the first steady job he could find. Now, with nothing to lose and no one waiting for him at home, he had time, endless, empty, aching time, and he decided to spend it building something. He taught himself to code from library computers, staying until closing time every single night, walking home in the dark because he'd missed the last bus. He built a crude version of his idea, then a better version, then a version good enough to show to a single small restaurant owner who agreed, out of pity more than belief, to try it for free. That restaurant cut its food waste by 30% in 2 months. Word spread slowly, restaurant to restaurant, the way real trust always does, not through advertising, but through people telling other people something actually works. Daniel poured every waking hour into refining what would eventually become an entire software platform, sleeping 4 hours a night, forgetting birthdays, forgetting holidays, forgetting almost everything except the quiet, burning need to prove that Vanessa's judgment of him had been wrong. It took 3 years before the platform found real investors. It took 5 years before it expanded into an entire logistics and inventory intelligence company serving thousands of businesses across the country. It took 7 years before Daniel Cole, the man who once ate cold rice on a stranger's couch, sold a majority stake in his company for a sum so large it barely felt real when he saw the number on the page. By year 8, he was worth more than $2 billion, and yet he lived with a quiet, almost invisible humility. A modest house, a simple car, no interviews, no headlines with his face on them. He had built his empire away from the spotlight, in part because that was his nature, and in part because some wounded corner of him never wanted to be found by the people who had once written him off. He had almost forgotten about the 20th anniversary reunion of Lincoln High School entirely, until an old friend, Marcus, tracked him down and begged him to come, promising it would be good for him to see how far he'd come compared to everyone who had once looked down on him. Daniel resisted for weeks. Reunions felt like stepping backward into a version of himself he had spent nearly a decade trying to outrun. But something, perhaps closure, perhaps a need to finally close a chapter that had never properly ended, made him say yes. The ballroom that evening glittered with chandeliers and string lights eerily similar to the ones at his old wedding, a detail that hit him harder than he expected the moment he walked through the doors in a simple tailored suit. No watch, no jewelry, nothing to announce what he had become. He blended into the crowd easily, greeting old classmates with warm but brief hellos, and it was in the middle of one of these conversations that he heard her laugh, that same sharp, theatrical laugh he used to love before it became something he flinched at. Vanessa stood near the champagne table in a deep green dress, her hair long and glossy, gesturing animatedly to a small circle of old classmates. Beside her stood a man in a pale blue jacket, clearly her date, his arm around her waist with practiced ease. Daniel's chest tightened, but he did not look away. He let himself watch her for a moment, not with anger, but with a strange, distant curiosity, the way one studies a photograph of a stranger from long ago. It was Marcus, unable to resist, who casually mentioned to the group nearby that Daniel had sold his tech company for over $2 billion the previous year. The words rippled outward through the room the way gossip always does at reunions, and within minutes Vanessa's head turned sharply toward him, her laughter dying in her throat. Daniel watched the exact moment recognition and disbelief collided on her face, the same face that had once told him he would never be anyone worth staying for. She crossed the room toward him, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her expression trying and failing to arrange itself into something casual. "Daniel," she said, her voice noticeably softer than the venom she'd once spoken his name with. I heard what Marcus said. Is it true?" He looked at her for a long moment, feeling not triumph, not bitterness, but something quieter and more surprising, peace. "It's true," he said simply. She laughed again, but this time it trembled at the edges, uncertain. "I always knew you had potential," she said, reaching out to touch his arm, an old familiar gesture that once made his heart race and now felt strangely hollow. "We were young. We made mistakes. Maybe we could catch up sometime, just the two of us." Daniel gently stepped back from her hand, not with cruelty, but with the calm finality of a man who had already forgiven the past without needing to relive it. "You didn't believe in me when I had nothing," he said quietly, "and I don't need you to believe in me now that I have everything. I hope you find happiness, Vanessa. I truly do. But I already found mine, building it alone." He turned and walked back toward Marcus, leaving her standing frozen by the champagne table, the woman who once held all the power in his life now holding nothing at all. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that their hardest chapter isn't their final one. Your support means more than you know and helps this channel keep telling stories that matter. And before we go, I want you to comment one single word below if you've ever had to rebuild your life from nothing and come out stronger on the other side. I read every single comment, and I want to see how many of you have lived a story just like Daniel's. Daniel drove home that night with the windows down, the cool air rushing past him, and for the first time in 8 years, he felt something unclench inside his chest completely. He wasn't thinking about Vanessa anymore. He was thinking about the quiet, unglamorous nights of coding on library computers, the cold rice, the broken elevator, the version of himself who had nothing but kept building anyway. He realized, driving past the lit-up city that had once nearly broken him, that his greatest revenge had never been becoming a billionaire. It had been becoming someone who no longer needed anyone's permission to believe in his own worth. And that, more than any number in a bank account, was the true fortune he had built.